On Sunday nights, one man decided what America could see and what it couldn't. Ed Sullivan, the rigid ringmaster of television's most powerful variety stage, crowned new royalty, from Elvis to the Beatles, while policing the boundaries of family-friendly taste. The contradictions made headlines. In 1957, cameras framed Elvis Presley from the waist up. In 1967, the Rolling Stones were told to soften. Let's spend the night together. On air, Jim Morrison sang the word higher anyway, and the Doors were never invited back. Bob Dylan walked off rather than change a satirical song. Comedian Jackie Mason was banished after a gesture Sullivan called obscene. For a show that delivered audiences in the tens of millions, every edit, lyric swap, or last-minute cancellation became a national controversy. Was Ed Sullivan a censor who stifled art, or a gatekeeper who kept a volatile culture war from burning down primetime TV? And how did one stiff-jawed host become both the launchpad for pop's biggest revolutions and the lightning rod for the era's fiercest fights over sex, drugs, and propriety? Ed Sullivan was born on September 28, 1901, in Harlem, New York City, and raised in nearby Port Chester, a working-class community that shaped his outlook on life. He was one of twin boys born to Elizabeth Smith and Peter Sullivan. A customs house employee, his family's Irish Catholic heritage, combined with the modest circumstances of his upbringing, instilled in him a deep respect for discipline, faith, and perseverance. Life was not easy for the Sullivans. With a household of 5 children and limited income, young Ed grew up in an environment where every contribution mattered. He developed an early fascination with newspapers, entertainment, and the characters who dominated both worlds. While other children dreamed of sports or traditional careers, Ed was drawn to storytelling, absorbing tales from the vaudeville stage, boxing rings, and local theaters. A pivotal figure in Ed's life was his mother, who encouraged his curiosity and believed education could be a path to something greater. His father, strict yet fair, instilled in him the sense that hard work and persistence were the keys to advancement. These parental influences created a balance of ambition and humility that would guide him throughout his career. Tragedy also played its part. Ed's twin brother, Daniel, died in infancy, a loss that shadowed the family and left Ed with a lifelong awareness of mortality and the importance of seizing opportunity. Growing up during the early 20th century, amid waves of immigration and cultural change, he witnessed both hardship and resilience in his community, lessons he would later apply when navigating the turbulent world of show business. By his teenage years, Sullivan had already begun carving out his identity. He was an athlete, a humorist, and a budding journalist, qualities that made him popular among peers. Yet beneath the charisma was a relentless drive, born of those early family struggles, to create a life larger than the one offered by his modest beginnings. Ed Sullivan's road into the entertainment world did not begin with lights and cameras but with words on paper. After graduating from Port Chester High School, he opted not for university but for immediate work, entering journalism in his late teens. He started as a sports reporter for the Port Chester Daily Item before moving to New York City, where he landed a job at the New York Evening Graphic, covering sports, theater, and society columns. Sullivan quickly earned a reputation for hustle and an eye for the human angle in every story. What set him apart was not elegant prose. Sullivan was never considered a literary stylist, but his tenacity and gift for connections. He built relationships with athletes, vaudeville performers, Broadway producers, and Hollywood executives, positioning himself as a bridge between sports, show business, and the reading public. His column, Little Old New York, became popular for its gossip, tidbits, and insider scoops. By the 1930s, Sullivan had established himself as more than just a newspaperman. He ventured into radio, hosting variety programs that mirrored his fascination with entertainment in all forms. He was a natural promoter, capable of drawing together music, comedy, and spectacle into a single stage. He also began producing benefits and variety shows, sharpening the instincts that would later make him a master of television programming. Sullivan's early career was not without setbacks. Critics often dismissed him as stiff, humorless, and lacking polish compared to seasoned entertainers. He was not a charismatic performer by traditional standards. Yet his very ordinariness, combined with a shrewd sense of what the public wanted to see, gave him a kind of everyman authority. He knew how to spot talent, and more importantly, how to package it for mass appeal. These years of grinding work as a journalist and radio personality provided the foundation for his later breakthrough. He was not yet the kingmaker of American pop culture, but he had cultivated the network of contacts and the instinct for showmanship that would soon find their stage on national television. Ed Sullivan's defining moment arrived in 1948, when CBS tapped him to host a new Sunday night variety program initially titled Toast of the Town. Sullivan was not the obvious choice. Critics dismissed him as awkward, stiff, and lacking the charisma of polished MCs. Yet his deep roots in journalism and show business connections gave him a crucial advantage. He could secure talent others could not. Within a few years, the program was renamed The Ed Sullivan Show, and it became one of the most influential stages in television history. The formula was deceptively simple, a mix of comedy, music, novelty acts, Broadway numbers, and international performers. But what set Sullivan apart was his uncanny ability to sense cultural moments before they happened. In 1948, television was still a new medium, but Sullivan recognized its potential to unite families across America in a shared weekly ritual. He turned his show into a national institution, one that consistently drew tens of millions of viewers. Success came from his role as a gatekeeper. In 1956, when Elvis Presley appeared, Sullivan initially expressed hesitation about the singer's gyrating style. But after seeing the ratings potential, he booked Presley, only to have CBS camera operators film him from the waist up to avoid indecency. The moment became a cultural flashpoint, symbolizing the clash between traditional values and the rising tide of youth rebellion. In 1964, Sullivan introduced the Beatles to America in what became one of the most watched broadcasts in television history. More than 73 million viewers tuned in, over a third of the US population at the time. That night is often credited with launching the British invasion and transforming global pop culture. The Rolling Stones, the Supremes, the Jackson 5, and countless others would follow, their careers accelerated by the Sullivan spotlight. Sullivan's influence extended beyond music. He gave platforms to African American performers like Nat King Cole, Louis Armstrong, and Sammy Davis Jr. at a time when segregation still scarred American society. His insistence on integrated casts made the show not only entertaining but socially significant. By the late 1950s and 1960s, The Ed Sullivan Show had become the gold standard of variety entertainment, winning Emmy Awards and dominating ratings. It was the program every performer wanted to book. A single appearance could turn an unknown into a star, and Sullivan became known as the kingmaker of American pop culture. Despite his awkward presence, his clipped speech, stiff posture, and famously wooden delivery, Ed Sullivan achieved what few hosts could. He made himself indispensable not because he was the star, but because he introduced the stars. His name became synonymous with Sunday night entertainment. This breakthrough transformed Sullivan from a former newspaperman into one of the most powerful figures in broadcasting. He wasn't just hosting a television show, he was curating the American cultural landscape. Behind the rigid posture and famously expressionless demeanor of Ed Sullivan was a man deeply committed to family. Unlike many entertainers of his era, Sullivan's personal life was remarkably stable, defined not by scandal but by loyalty to his wife and daughter. In 1926, long before television fame, Ed married Sylvia Weinstein, a woman who would remain his partner for nearly 5 decades. Their marriage bridged cultural lines. He was Irish Catholic, she was Jewish, an uncommon pairing at the time, and one that initially faced skepticism from both families. But the couple's bond proved resilient, and they built a life together anchored in mutual support. Sylvia was not a performer, yet she played a crucial role in Sullivan's success. She often offered advice, attended events by his side, and served as a grounding force in an industry prone to excess. While Ed was notoriously private, those close to him noted that he leaned heavily on Sylvia's steadiness during the pressures of live television and the constant scrutiny that came with his role as America's cultural gatekeeper. Their only child, Elizabeth Betty Sullivan, became the center of their world. Ed, who spent countless Sundays introducing stars to the nation, was said to be a devoted father off camera. He doted on Betty, accompanying her to school events and making time for family despite the relentless pace of his work. Friends observed that the famously stiff showman softened considerably in the company of his wife and daughter. Still, Sullivan's career often overshadowed his personal life. His demanding schedule and the pressure to continually deliver top talent meant that family moments were sometimes sacrificed to the demands of live television. Yet unlike many of his contemporaries, there were no widely reported affairs, no messy divorces, and no sensational headlines about his private conduct. His scandal, if it could be called that, played out entirely in the public arena of his show, not in his marriage. There were, however, rumors of Sullivan's stubbornness and controlling nature spilling into his home life. Colleagues described him as exacting, sometimes difficult, and it is likely that this intensity did not vanish once he left the studio. But Sylvia's patience and quiet resilience balanced his more domineering traits. Their marriage endured not because it was without challenges, but because both were willing to adapt and support each other through decades of cultural upheaval. In an industry notorious for fleeting romances and public implosions, Ed Sullivan's personal relationships stood out for their solidity. His greatest love story was not with the spotlight, but with Sylvia, the woman who stood beside him from the struggling days of a newspaperman to his reign as the most powerful host on American television. For all his stability at home, Ed Sullivan's career was never free from controversy. The very success of The Ed Sullivan Show made it a battleground for cultural tensions. And Sullivan himself, rigid, opinionated, and fiercely protective of his program's family-friendly reputation, often stood at the center of the storm. One of the earliest flashpoints came with Elvis Presley in 1956. Sullivan initially dismissed Elvis as vulgar and declared he would never appear on his stage. But after seeing the ratings power of Presley's appearances elsewhere, Sullivan reversed course. When Elvis finally performed, CBS censors filmed him only from the waist up, fearing his hip gyrations were too risque for American households. Critics accused Sullivan of hypocrisy, while teenagers saw the restrictions as proof of the generational divide. The controversy only amplified Elvis's mystique. Similar clashes followed throughout the 1960s. When the Rolling Stones performed "Let's Spend the Night Together," Sullivan demanded they alter the lyric to "Let's Spend Some Time Together." The band reluctantly complied, visibly mocking the change on live television. A year later, the Doors refused to bend. Jim Morrison defiantly sang the word "higher" in "Light My Fire," despite Sullivan's explicit instructions. Furious, Sullivan banned them permanently. Singers weren't the only flashpoints. Folk legend Bob Dylan walked out of a scheduled 1963 appearance when producers told him he couldn't perform "Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues," a satirical song targeting right-wing politics. Sullivan reportedly supported Dylan privately, but network pressure prevailed, and the incident painted him as complicit in censorship. Comedians also sparred with him. In 1964, Jackie Mason was accused of making an obscene gesture toward Sullivan during a live broadcast after Sullivan gestured at him to wrap up. Though Mason insisted it was a misunderstanding, Sullivan banned him for 2 years, damaging Mason's career. Even guests who agreed to perform sometimes bristled under Sullivan's control. He had a reputation for being exacting, sometimes dictating wardrobe or demanding lyric changes. Performers felt stifled, yet they also knew that a single appearance on his stage could make or break their careers. This tension made Sullivan both feared and indispensable. Beyond entertainment clashes, Sullivan also waded into the era's social and political currents. He earned both praise and criticism for regularly featuring black artists like Nat King Cole, Louis Armstrong, and the Supremes. At a time when segregation still defined much of American life, Sullivan's insistence on integrated programming was bold, yet conservative critics accused him of pushing boundaries too far, while activists argued he did not go far enough in challenging racial stereotypes. Through it all, Sullivan remained unbending. He saw himself as the guardian of a national living room, responsible for balancing tradition with change. To his defenders, he was protecting families from obscenity. To his detractors, he was a censor who stifled artistic freedom. These controversies did not destroy Sullivan's career. In fact, they often fueled the show's cultural relevance. Each clash highlighted the shifting values of post-war America, with Sullivan caught in the middle as both arbiter and antagonist. But the constant battles took their toll. By the late 1960s, as television audiences fragmented and tastes shifted toward more daring content, Sullivan's rigid style began to feel outdated. Ratings dipped, and critics questioned whether the stone-faced kingmaker could still dictate what America wanted to see. Sullivan's major breakdown, then, was not a single scandal but a cumulative erosion of cultural authority. His show, once the uncontested stage of the nation, became a lightning rod for arguments about censorship, morality, and freedom of expression. For decades, he had been the gatekeeper, but as the cultural revolution of the 1960s surged forward, the gate was breaking open. By the early 1970s, the very qualities that had once made Ed Sullivan a household name began to work against him. For over 2 decades, he had reigned as the gatekeeper of American entertainment, but as tastes shifted toward edgier, youth-driven programming, his format seemed increasingly old-fashioned. The controversies of the 1960s, censorship battles with Elvis, the Rolling Stones, and the Doors, had made him appear out of touch with a new generation that prized authenticity over restraint. Ratings for The Ed Sullivan Show declined steadily as competition grew. Programs like The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and newer variety specials felt more fluid and contemporary. By 1971, CBS decided to cancel The Ed Sullivan Show, ending a run that had shaped American culture for nearly a quarter of a century. The cancellation was a symbolic moment. The man who had once introduced Elvis and the Beatles to America was now sidelined by the very cultural revolution he had helped to unleash. The fallout was personal as well as professional. Sullivan struggled with the loss of his platform, having built his identity around being the arbiter of Sunday night television. Though still respected, he no longer held the power to make stars with a single appearance. He attempted to stage comebacks through specials and guest hosting, but none captured the magic of his heyday. The culture had moved on, and his carefully controlled style seemed like a relic in an era hungry for experimentation. Yet, even in decline, Sullivan's influence could not be erased. He remained a fixture in public memory, his name synonymous with the golden age of television variety. Musicians, comedians, and actors alike credited him for launching their careers. Despite his reputation as stiff and sometimes tyrannical, he was remembered as a man who gave unprecedented exposure to African American performers and international artists at a time when many doors remained closed. Personally, Sullivan leaned on his family during this difficult transition. His wife Sylvia and daughter Betty provided stability as he adjusted to life outside of weekly broadcasts. Behind the stoic public persona was a man deeply aware that his cultural reign was over, yet also proud of the role he had played in shaping modern entertainment. In the end, Sullivan did not find a true comeback in the traditional sense, but his legacy endured, with reruns, retrospectives, and tributes reminding audiences that, for more than 2 decades, America gathered around their televisions every Sunday because of him. His fall from relevance was inevitable, but the imprint he left on popular culture ensured that he would never be forgotten. Ed Sullivan's story ultimately closes not with scandal or disgrace but with the quiet dignity of a man whose influence had already reshaped an era. After his show was canceled in 1971, he remained a symbolic figure, appearing occasionally in retrospectives and tributes. Behind the scenes, however, his health began to decline. In 1974, Sullivan was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, but in characteristic fashion, He insisted the family keep the diagnosis from him. He passed away that October at age 73, leaving behind a legacy as both kingmaker and cultural lightning rod. Today, The Ed Sullivan Show is remembered as one of the most important platforms in American broadcasting history. Clips of Elvis shaking his hips, the Beatles conquering America, or the Jackson 5 debuting as children continue to circulate online, reminding new generations of how one man's stage defined the pulse of 20th century pop culture. His show helped mainstream black performers, broke down barriers between high and low art, and created the blueprint for the modern variety show. Yet his legacy is not without complexity. Critics still debate his role as a censor, the rigidity of his control, and whether he stifled artistic freedom in the name of family entertainment. To some, he was a gatekeeper who clung too tightly to outdated norms. To others, he was a necessary bridge between tradition and revolution, giving controversial acts their first step into American living rooms. What remains undeniable is that Ed Sullivan changed television forever. His awkward presence, once mocked, became part of his brand. His taste, often questioned, nonetheless introduced icons who would dominate music and entertainment for decades. And so the question lingers, was Ed Sullivan simply a product of his time? Or was he the man who, for better and worse, taught America what pop culture could be? The answer lies in every black and white clip, in every star who credits him with their start, and in the enduring memory of a Sunday night ritual that united millions.